Go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/online therapy to get 20% off your first month of cognitive behavioural therapy, with weekly sessions online with a therapist, in addition to worksheets, a journal, meditation and yoga videos, and unlimited messaging. There's strong evidence that CBT can help people who hoard, and accessing therapy online can be affordable and accessible. Find out more and get your discount at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/online therapy.
Now on Broadway, An Enemy of the People is a New York Times critic's pick. Jeremy Strong is one of the great actors of his generation, hails the Chicago Tribune. In a performance the Wall Street Journal praises as powerfully affecting and bitterly funny. Michael Imperioli sets off sparks, cheers the Hollywood Reporter. Victoria Pedretti is luminous, raves variety. From director Sam Gold and playwright Amy Herzog, An Enemy of the People is urgent, electrifying, and haunting, declares USA Today. An Enemy of the People, on Broadway through June 16th only.
Normally, being a little extra might be a bit much, but not when it comes to healthcare. That's why United Healthcare's Health Protector Guard fixed indemnity insurance plans, underwritten by Golden Rule Insurance Company, supplement your primary plan so you manage out-of-pocket costs. Learn more at uh1.com.
With LinkedIn Jobs, we tap into a network of more than 1 billion professionals to help you find quality professionals quickly and easily for any role you need. Marketing wizards? Found them.
Software engineers?
Found.
That project manager I could never seem to hire?
And found. LinkedIn Jobs quickly matches your roles with candidates with the right skills and experience. In fact, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Post your first job for free and get started at linkedin.com/spoken. That's linkedin.com/spoken. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome to the Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with That Hoarder podcast. I am drowning in stuff and trying to find a way out. Listen as I explore the issues and delve deep as somebody profoundly affected by hoarding disorder. Find out more, including links to subscribe to the podcast and all of my social media at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Finally, I am not a doctor. I am just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. So I am here with Dr Jan Eppingstall, a counsellor in Melbourne, Australia, who specialises in working with people who hoard. She also has a PhD in hoarding. Jan, how are you?
Excellent, thank you very much. What's happening in your part of the world?
It is very suddenly autumn. We went from abnormally hot to overnight grey skies, rain, definite September vibes here.
So we're the exact opposite of that, and it has suddenly got very warm, but it is splitting between very warm and very cold each day.
Yes.
So typical Melbourne weather.
So in Jan's last episode, we talked about things that might look like hoarding, but are actually something else. Some of the something else differential diagnoses that we talked about included things that had a common theme, which is executive dysfunction. So today we're going to talk about that. So Jan, first of all, can you explain what executive function is so that we can then go on to understand executive dysfunction?
Yes, exactly. So executive functions are the command and control processes of the brain that allow us to perform goal-directed behaviours, and it's basically like a conductor of all the cognitive skills. And the mental skills that allow us to play with ideas, think before we act, resist temptation, stay focused and flexibly adapt to changing circumstances. That's it in a nutshell, but they can then be divided into two groups. So you have the organisation, gathering of information and structuring it for evaluation, and then regulation, so taking stock of your surroundings, changing your behaviour in response to it. And these higher order brain functions are in our prefrontal cortex, so in the frontal lobe of the brain. the most developed part of our mental capacity is in the prefrontal cortex.
So a website called understood.org says that executive function is responsible for many skills, including paying attention, organising, planning, prioritising, starting tasks and staying focused on them to completion, understanding different points of view, regulating emotions, and self-monitoring, which is keeping track of what you're doing. Now, even just reading that list, it becomes clear that there are themes that are very relevant to hoarding.
Yes.
And while you might hear about executive dysfunction mostly in the context of autism and ADHD, you don't have to have either of those things to struggle with these things, right?
No, certainly not. And I mean, in autism and ADHD, the brain is wired differently. I mean, many see this as a disability, and I guess it is in a neurotypical world, but in actual fact, it's merely a difference. But also traumatic brain injury, stroke or dementia can significantly impact the executive functions. And in these cases, there is an organic difference in the person's brain. But many other environmental reasons can lead to executive dysfunction. Like if you suffer from depression, this can impact your ability to organise and execute plans. So many of us struggle with that if we have suffered from depression. Recently, many people, many friends and people I know have been describing brain fog in relation to things like long COVID. But we often hear of those with autoimmune diseases like lupus, arthritis, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, multiple sclerosis, MS, reporting those persistent difficulties with concentration and focus, memory and mental clarity. So there's just a whole raft of things that could be impacting, not allowing us to use our executive function in the way we'd like. But also, our executive functioning can be dulled as a result of poor sleep hygiene, stress, medications, vitamin deficiencies, hormonal changes, or diet. I mean, it's just such a difficult thing to pinpoint, as to why that part of your brain is really not working how you'd like it to.
And that leads nicely to my next question, actually, which is, do we know what's going on when we have what is commonly referred to as an executive function fail? Is it something cognitive? Is it structural in our brains or learnt, or something we never learnt to do? Is it situational? I start Jan off with the easy questions.
Can I say it could be all of the above? It could be all of the above. Look, the truth is executive dysfunction can only really be measured by standardized testing. See how well our executive function works at a single point in time. So right now, fMRI tech is not widely available to actually look at the blood flow that occurs within brain regions and to see the activity of which part of the brain's handling these critical functions. And studies today really are limited in what they can tell us about what's specifically going on. I wouldn't put it past the Billionaires Boys Club to include some sort of an fMRI in our next smartphone update, but even if we did, they don't kind of allow us to draw conclusions about any individual's brain because the level of activity it's never the same twice. Like you could measure it now and then measure it in an hour or measure it tomorrow and it will be different because of all these other factors that all these other variables. fMRI studies are kind of pumped up as being this gold standard and that's wonderful. We can see all these things going on in the brain. But task-based fMRIs, as they're currently used, can't actually tell you what an individual's brain activation will look like. Like, we can't predict anything from one test. We can't predict anything from that fMRI, and it just doesn't tell us why. It doesn't tell us, is it situational? Is it because you're tired? Is it because, some trauma has happened to you? All that sort of stuff. Is it structural? We can't tell from that. So it's, maybe we just haven't ever really learned how to use our executive functions in the most effective way. It could be all of the above. It might be a combination of those, or it could be more one than the other, but we just can't really tell why it's happened. We kind of know it has happened because we haven't been able to manage a particular situation well, but we can't know why at the moment.
Yeah. And fMRI, just to be clear, is functional magnetic resonance imaging. So it sees what's going on in your brain as it happens.
Mm. Yeah, so basically it's about the blood flow, and I don't know exactly how it works, so I'll just say that.
Don't expect you to. But
yeah, it does show you where the blood's flowing, so that the idea is that's where the activity is occurring in the brain at that time. And that is what we kind of keep coming back to that in research, but we cannot break apart. We cannot tease out what it is that is causing that activity to happen in that person's brain at that time.
And if we find we do struggle with executive dysfunction, is this something we can change and improve in ourselves?
Definitely. Executive function can actually be improved through targeted practice. Like, we kind of need to practice it. And we need to challenge it, not just use it. I think that's kind of key as well. But the interesting thing is, and I discussed this in my thesis chapter on cognitive performance in Hoarding, things like mood and stress are likely to impair anyone's executive function.
It's why when someone's got a new baby, they can't make a decision because they haven't slept for a week, regardless of their normal state of mental health or their normal state of neurodivergence.
Exactly. If we're stressed or depressed, like especially if we've just had a baby and all of those sorts of things, or someone's passed away in our life, or any sort of stressor like that, our inability to get it together, because we feel like that, I just can't get it together. That's kind of how we describe when we can't use our executive function. It's like, I can't get it together. If we're stressed, then we are likely to fulfill the prophecy. So I guess we kind of need to increase our awareness of how we work as well. So knowing more about those internal workings of our executive function is worth, tapping into and looking at. Observe and take note of your tendencies, and when you find it more difficult to maintain focus, or when you become hyper-focused, or when you act before you think about the consequences. We're not saying none of us do that, but if you reflect back on it, you can use that information to inform future behaviours. And also we can identify our strengths and weaknesses and then lean into our strengths rather than just focus on what we're not so good at. But what I think is really exciting is that there's a lot of activities that we can do to improve all executive functions, like the whole bunch. So music, dance, theatre, sports like soccer or basketball, if you like team sports, are really good at assisting with your executive function. Traditional martial arts like taekwondo are really, really great. There was a huge systematic review done a couple of years back that found that mindful movement activities like martial arts, again, and Qigong and Tai Chi show the very best results for improving your executive function. So I can't stop hearing people talk on and on about Qigong. I haven't tried it, but I've heard it is amazing. So have a look, see if there's a local Qigong class you could go to, or Tai Chi class. But it really does help with that, improving, your management frontal lobe activity. But also like things like caring for an animal or cooking or woodwork or sewing, they all kind of require planning and flexibility and stick-to-itiveness, creative problem solving. Those are the types of things, particularly things that use, the physical and the mental combined, are really good for strengthening that part of your mental functioning.
I did Tai Chi for a while. It started off as a bit of I used to have a neighbour and we were both really bad insomniacs. So I would quite often be round at his or he'd be round at mine at about 2:00 in the morning, just chatting. And there was a 3 a.m. 15-minute TV programme where you could watch and do Tai Chi. And we started doing it, partly not taking it very seriously, but we both got quite into it. And it was like, if you're going to be up at 3 a.m. and talking nonsense with the guy down the road, it's quite a nice way to spend that time. I might look it up again.
Yeah, and I hear Qigong is similar. Like I hear it's similar in that mindfulness. It's mindful movement, isn't it? Which can really be helpful. But I swear, about a dozen people have told me I need to try Qigong. So I think eventually I will. I promise, and I'll report back.
Oh, we know now how to create habits. So
yes,
that can become your next habit to create.
I just crossed my fingers. Hopefully.
So we're going to look now at some of the ways executive dysfunction and hoarding can go hand in hand, including tips to manage this stuff better. And one big one that comes up a lot involves a word that I can't say very well, which is task initiation, which is getting moving, getting started. And this is huge for me. And people often think that it's that you can't get started on a task that you're dreading. But sometimes it's a task you want to do, you just still can't get going. What is going on when we can't initiate a task?
Oh, this is so interesting because it's a question I constantly ask myself. Why can't you just do it? Why can't you just get out of the chair, complete the task, even something I really want to. Like, I really, really want to do this thing. I really need to. But I think the answer is really idiosyncratic and context specific. So each of us has our blocks, things that block us, often being unable to initiate something is a result of that we perceive we have a lack of self-efficacy. Like we just don't think we know how to do the task, so we put it off. Even if it's something we really want, if we don't actually know how to go about it, then chances are we think we're better off to not try than try and fail. We avoid taking that first step because we don't know where to get started. Like, that's a big one. We know what we want, we know the outcome, but we can't work out where to start. Or we're stressed from other parts of our lives, which is a common one these days. The task just seems kind of unclear. Again, like we sort of know, but we're not quite sure. And that's easy for us to push aside and just think, I'll just stay sitting here until I feel the urge. And I have that overwhelming motivation, which never comes. And just it feels too big and complex. But I think also some of us might actually be our nervous system might be in shutdown sometimes when we're really like that turtle mode where moving in any way for any reason kind of seems impossible. Maybe something triggered dissociation and all you can do tonight is just sit and watch reruns of Kath and Kim lying on the couch. Like, that's all you physically can do. So it could very well be something that's triggered it. So I guess what we can do is notice when that happens. What happened before? and come up with a way to kind of circumvent or deal with that to stop it happening again, or allowing it to happen, and decide, that you'll talk to yourself with that compassionate voice when it happens next time, so that you can keep the stress reduced, because that's part of it, isn't it? As soon as if you don't speak with a compassionate voice to yourself, you get stressed, which means you're even less likely to initiate the task.
That feels like it ties into something that changed a lot for me when I was doing CBT, which is when you can't, I can't. Well, I would pre-CBT just go, I can't. Full stop, leave the room. And one of the things that CBT taught me that was so valuable was to question it further. Why can't I? And that will highlight a lot of those things you've just brought up. Okay, the task is too big. I know how to deal with that particular problem. I know that the solution to that is make it a smaller task, break it down, whatever. Or if I'm not fully sure what I'm meant to be doing. I sometimes have that at work. If somebody's if there's something I'm meant to be doing and I feel like I'm not entirely sure, then rather than clarify, I will just panic and not, if there is a block and you can work out which block it is, you're in a much better position to go, okay, I know the solution to that. But if you stop at no.
Yeah, exactly. It's that curiosity of, well, why is it that I can't do that? Yeah. And I can't yet, or I can't right now, or I can't, and why is it not something you can do right now? So that is definitely something we can all do more of that, just rather than taking our word for it, our own word for it. We should just drill down a little bit more, because we wouldn't accept that from someone else. We wouldn't, I wouldn't accept that from one of my children if they said, I can't, blah, blah.
Yes, will you make me a cup of tea? No.
No. I was like, oh, what do you mean no? Yes, you can. You don't want to. And then it's that whole questioning, isn't it? It's like, exactly. Yeah. And CBT is really good at that. CBT is really good for that sort of thing, for sure.
It's I always say it's not a complete solution, but what it does very well.
Yes.
So recently I needed to leave the house to post a parcel. I sold an old phone on eBay, £400.
What?
So
£400?
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. That's like $800.
I know. I was very pleased with that. So while I do not advocate selling everything, because that trips you up and slows you down and all of that, the odd time you get 400 quid for a phone that you weren't going to use anymore. So I needed to leave the house to post the parcel. But because I didn't have a deadline, like a time I was meeting someone or an appointment, I could not get myself moving. Like if I'm meeting Jan for lunch at 1 o'clock, I know that I have to leave at 12:30, and I can do that. But if it's just like sometime this afternoon, I have to go to the post office, it is torture. I just cannot move. But what I did, and I don't think this would work every time, but what I did was I texted my best friend and I said, because she knows me so well, I didn't need to explain. I just said, I need to leave the house. I don't have a deadline. Can I text you when I'm out? And that will be by 3 p.m. And she was like, yeah, like no further explanation needed. Yeah, sure. And as it was getting closer to 3 p.m., I was like, I said I would, so I will. And it got me moving. And I texted her at 3:03 outside going, yay, I've done it. And I don't know whether that's accountability or if it's like externalizing the deadline. But could that kind of trick work with hoarding stuff as well?
Oh, definitely. This is a combination of things that could help, right?
Yeah.
So it's both that externalizing and accountability. I think it's an excellent strategy. What I think is most powerful is your flexibility to try something new, like using that kind of creative problem solving to tailor a method just for you.
Yeah.
I think that is that's the most powerful part. Many, me included, many of us are ready to rationalize why a strategy won't work for us, but we don't actually test it.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, oh, no, that wouldn't work for me for these reasons.
Yeah.
Have you tried? No, but I just know. I don't need to try it. And we don't use that idea for that strategy and then make it work for us. We just immediately say, nah, it's not going to work. That won't work for me. You know, if I had $1, seriously, for every time someone said, oh, that won't work for me for 1,000 reasons.
I'm so much more open to testing things than I ever used to be.
Yeah, that being curious and experimenting, it really does help. It really, really does. I also think that grouping tasks can kind of help you get moving. Like just going to the post office might not be enough to get you showered, dressed and in the car. Like that's for me, that's especially if you're working from home and you haven't got any appointments or anything that day. You know, perhaps organising to catch up with someone for a quick coffee that day can help. I mean, even if they beg off, chances are you're still dressed. So you're going to have one less excuse to head out. But trying to group those things together and having more than just one thing to do, it can be, especially if you're accountable to someone else. I'm meeting someone else, or I've told someone I will post it at that time. On that day as well, that could help. Just saying to the person who's purchased it, I am going to post it and you will get it by. Could be enough.
I know, because I know I'm so deadline oriented in all my life. I know that if at work I'm discussing a piece, a task with somebody, I know that if they don't say, can you do it by Friday, I say, I'll get it to you by Friday. Because I need there to be a deadline, and I know that giving myself a deadline in my own head does very little. I'm not the kind of, some people can set incremental deadlines and do it because they set the deadline. That doesn't do it for me. But if I've said to somebody else, I'll do this, and I don't want to let them down. I want to save face. I don't want to, all of that. So part of it is about knowing your own weaknesses or patterns or whatever, isn't it?
Exactly. And the other thing is, I was talking with a client about this the other day, and I couldn't remember the word for it, but it's Parkinson's law, which is, the activity will take, up as much time as there is available, expand or shrink, right? So that definitely happens to me. Who do you give the most, if you want something done, who do you give it to? The busiest person. It's all that sort of stuff. Because the longer I have to do something, the less likely I am to get off my butt and do it. So, when you're busy, man, you can really be effective.
Whereas if you've got one thing to do all day, absolutely hopeless. I know a friend recently went back to work after maternity leave, and he's now doing 3 days a week instead of 5. And she's self-employed, so she was worried about the impact on her income. But because she knows she's only got 3 days, she's actually nailing every minute of those 3 days because there's less time to do that. Yeah.
That is the whole, I'm just going this 4-day week thing. Really, we should all just be doing that, gunning for that ourselves, because you really do eke out every minute if you've got less time. You really do. And if you've got a child at home waiting.
Yeah, whenever it's tested out, productivity goes up, not down, when people do 4 days. Every time.
I know.
I get it.
I know.
I make this podcast because I think it's important. I started it as an outlet for myself, but it's become much more than that. And I hear from people all the time about how listening to me talk about my experience and interview specialists and experts is helping them. Hearing those stories makes the time and cost absolutely worth it. But if you want to help to ensure that the future of the podcast is sustainable, you can donate to help with costs. To send a one-off or recurring donation, just go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/donate. Thank you. So another thing I've done when I can't get started is to almost trick myself into it by telling myself I'm actually doing something else. If I can't get bags to the bin, I tell myself, I'm not taking the bags to the bin. I'm just going to put them outside the front door. That's all I'm doing. And then when it comes to it, I'm there in the open front door with the bags. And I just think, I may as well take them out to the bin. And I do it. Or like, you don't need to get up and go into the other room, which you've been trying to do for 3/4 of an hour. But get up and have a bit of a dance around. And then once I'm up and having a bit of a dance around, I can just go into the next room. Why is that helpful? And are there good tips we could learn from that for hoarding and acquiring?
Oh, look, I think it works because you've removed the pressure or the pain of having to do something. You just want to feel good and you want to avoid pain. So usually we're avoiding something that we perceive as extremely difficult or boring. Like often it's boring. Often it is just, and when we tell ourselves we just need to get the bag outside the front door, we feel good. Little dopamine. We feel even better when we actually put it in the bin, take that extra step. So it's like, I did more than I did more than enough. Again, remember that the size of the behaviour doesn't matter to your brain. We talked about that in the podcast we did about habits. It's our judgment that impacts our sense of achievement. It could be wiggle your big toe would be enough. And it's also compassionate to do that. Like it's allowing, that self-compassion allows you to try and fail, and it gives you room to be yourself and kind of be enough. Well, I only need to get it that far, rather than, you lazy.
Yeah, that's really true. Yeah,
you do, because you go, oh God, for God's sake. Yes. You tell yourself, you say that stuff to yourself all the time. Come on, wow, are you that lazy? Why would you? If a family member or a partner or something said that to you, you certainly would be getting up out of the chair, would you? And you really wouldn't. Your butt would be stuck to that chair. You'd be adamant. No. So if you say it to yourself, you're not moving.
Yeah. And the next step after starting something is being able to stick with it, which is another area where people who struggle with executive function can get stuck. I find that sometimes I am single-minded. I am hyper-focused on what I'm doing. An earthquake wouldn't stop me. Other times I'm flitting from one thing to another, and unable to settle on anything. And I think that's quite human, but it can get in the way when I'm trying to de-hoard in particular. So how can we improve our focus or our ability to stick with things we've started?
Oh, this is so super interesting. This idea of hyperfocus and distractibility. I recently came across a book that I mentioned in the last podcast. Ed Hallowell and John Ratty have written ADHD 2.0. And they've summarised in the book some emerging evidence kind of around this topic, and it links in with what we talked about before about movement, which I think is really fascinating. And it may or may not be relevant for everybody, but you might find that sometimes you're forced into hyperfocus when you don't want to be, or you can't switch out of distractibility when you want to do that deep work. Is that kind of what you mean? Like sometimes you're hyper-focused, but you really, like, I need to stop doing this now, but you can't seem to stop. Yeah.
Someone said to me once that with ADHD, it's not that you can't focus, it's that you can't choose what you focus on. And again, as we talked about in the previous episode, I don't know if I have ADHD or not, but nobody would be surprised if I did.
Yeah.
Ditto autism. So,
Exactly. And if it helps, if it describes something that, that you experience, who are you hurting by using some of the tips and tricks? So this is super, super interesting. I was super interested to read this. It gave me a little bit of an insight, and I'm thinking, okay, this could help people. So when you're engaged in a task, there's various kind of clumps of neurons that work together in what is known as the task positive network, or the TPN. This is when you're engaged in a task, when you're not conscious of whether you're happy or not. You kind of just, you can become frustrated at times, but then you'll keep on task and those moments pass and you keep going. It's kind of essentially a flow state. But you can get stuck in this state, like scrolling on social media, going down an internet rabbit hole. They're all downsides of that hyper focus. Most of us these days are not focusing long enough on tasks that require cognitive attention, like cooking or reading a book. We're passively consuming like 30-second videos on TikTok or Instagram ad nauseum. And because the TPN is like a muscle, many of us are not exercising it enough and it atrophies. But when you allow your mind to wander from a task, or you kind of pause long enough between a task, your brain actually flips into a different mode and uses a different bunch of neurons called the default mode network, or the DMN. This is a brain state that kind of allows for creativity, expansive thinking, daydreaming. It's like when you're daydreaming and you walk into a power pole or something, or you miss your train stop. It's that really sort of, daydreamy state. And it's the way that we can solve crossword puzzles or come up with big new ideas for projects. That's the default mode network. It's also where we go to self-reflect and navel gaze. So it's where we're kind of like in our heads, right? And we're wishing and imagining these things. And for people who hoard, who are often, in my experience, highly imaginative and creative people, they can often get stuck in that DMN, unable to kind of switch out of it and get into deep work, right? And that default mode network is kind of a chatterbox, and it tends to be a mix of good and bad stuff, but it's often kind of tuned into radio doom and gloom, talking about all our lifetimes of frustrations and disappointments and shame and all that sort of stuff. Now, what the research has found is that neurotypical brains are either in TPN or DMN at any one time. But interestingly, those who suffer from ADHD, which is many people who hoard and who may be listening, both of those networks are online at the same time. So it's like a sticky, like the switch is sticky.
Yeah.
So they're competing. So the toggle switch is just not connected in ADHD. So the creative and imaginative person is kind of flipping constantly from building something beautiful and amazing to the depressive kind of internalized sniping. Oh, that's ugly. God, you failed again. Like the tortured artist, right? So we're doing that. We're kind of battling in our mind. So what do we do? What do we do to kind of stop those two things competing? We know that neurons that fire together wire together, and we can kind of take advantage of the fact that the default mode network can actually jump tracks and use that for good. So practice making that toggle switch move. So the minute you start shifting into that radio doom and gloom and castigating yourself, look elsewhere, do anything. Walk around, do star jumps, feed the dog, sing a song, some action right? Zero in on your breathing or whatever. Use that 6-3-8-3 pattern of breathing. Basically do anything to externalize yourself, to shift yourself out of that navel gazing state. Something active, and then this will allow you to engage the task positive network and focus on the project at hand. So anytime you kind of go off into that navel gaze, do something, whatever, I don't know, just anything.
Have a stretch, yeah.
Stretch, go, oh, yep, whatever. Sing a song, dance, and then you can and the more you practice that, the more you will be able to actually shift it when you want to. You won't have to worry about it doing it without your consent. It'll be, so anytime it pops up, okay, what can I do now? I can turn my head, I can, bob around, I can dance, whatever. It's about that movement. And that, I think, is what we talked about before, about task initiation, getting up off the chair. Any sort of movement in the chair can help to get you out of your head and into your body.
I find sometimes even just saying out loud, stop it. It's like it wakes me up and I go, okay, come on, do what you're doing.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll say to myself, where did you go? Why? Where did you go? Yeah. It's like you almost want to slap yourself back into your own body rather than being in your mind, up in your head. Just ruminate, because you really are. You're ruminating.
Yeah. And I think with sticking with tasks as well, there can be a real issue of a constant desire for novelty and newness. And I think that's certainly why I acquire sometimes. And also why, say, shampoo, I want to try the new shampoo. And then I buy the new shampoo and I don't finish the old shampoo because I need the new. And so I've got 8 shampoos lined up that are a third used. And I think that can be, with sticking with a task, it can be the same thing. Okay, I've started on the books, but look over there, there's this. And for me, just clocking that can be helpful if I'm in the shop and there's a new variety of something. Sometimes just going, oh, that's that desire for novelty again, can be enough to calm down the urgency of needing the new smelling shampoo.
Exactly. And the other thing that might work is just saying, oh, it'll be here next time. Yes. It'll be here when I come back.
Yeah.
It'll still be here. I won't miss out. Because that, we've talked about that previously with the whole idea of scarcity, I won't miss out. It's okay. And if I do, would it really be that bad? Probably not. And knowing that those are the marketing tools they're using, going, oh, this is a brand new, hair shampoo. Chances are it's the same hair shampoo, just...
Yeah. I'm currently trying to work through some of my backlog of tinned food on the grounds that there's only so many spares a person needs. And if I keep buying spares and never use them because they're spares, then I end up with what I've got, which is cupboards that are full and there's still more tins. And so I am testing doing fewer food shops and when I do, strictly only buying fresh things like veg, basically, and making myself use what's in the cupboards. And it's an interesting exercise in challenging my fear of scarcity because there is plenty of food in the cupboards, and yet in the shop there's always but I do like ratatouille, and it's testing my, I don't know, my resolve or my anxiety levels or a combination of the two. But when I then don't buy new tin stuff and shop my own tins in my own cupboards, I'm coming up with creative meals because I have less fresh stuff deliberately in order to try and use this. And because there isn't always what I would most want, but I'm going, but that doesn't have to mean that this doesn't work. I can just make something that isn't quite what I had in mind, but will be as good or will be nearly as good, and that is fine. But
exactly.
It's work. My brain is
it's
working
work.
on this.
It does. Yeah, exactly. It takes a lot. And that's what we often just want, the easy way out, don't we? We just go, oh, God, all these other stresses in our lives just layer on top of us and we go, oh, my God, I just want to get pizza from the shop, or I just want to, heat up some soup, or I just, and that's the hardest. What I've done before, and it does work, I just type into a search engine the three ingredients I've got.
Yes.
It's actually genius. They come up with so many good, and you go, oh, I've got all those things. They're all in my pantry.
I did that last night. Yes.
Yeah, it is actually genius.
I Googled, how can you make jacket potato and baked beans more interesting? And did you hear? She answered.
She answered. She's nosy. She's nosy. Bugger off.
Yeah, and it makes it's good and it's challenging my things have to be just so. It's challenging my over planning. It's challenging my it will be a disaster if I want tomatoes on toast and there's no tomato, and it feels like important work that a lot of people wouldn't even think about, but that is challenging a lot of my touch points.
And it's challenging enough. It's not overtaxing. It's just enough.
Yeah. I still have fresh veg, which is the most important fresh bit to me. Everything else I'm working out.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And, there's a bit of pride there going, that was really good. And I really enjoyed that meal.
Yeah, I'm going to have that again. That's great.
And I shopped my own pantry, and I'm working on these things that I've been struggling to change over the years, because it doesn't happen. It's never going to happen in an instant. All of this stuff just takes practice, and it is work. It is actually work, that problem solving and trying and being creative. Even with something like food, it's very easy these days to just give up and go, I'll get takeaway.
Yeah. So prioritizing is also a skill that can be compromised by executive dysfunction. And this felt to me really relevant to hoarding in two ways, actually. One is prioritizing tasks. I think we can be quite prone to spending hours and hours on an area that's not that bad or not that important. And the other is prioritizing what to keep. We struggle to work out what's important and what should be kept, so we keep it all. Or we don't know which bits to acquire, so we acquire them all. I don't know what colour I like, I'll buy both. So with executive dysfunction in mind, how can we improve our prioritization skills?
Oh, yeah. So you were just describing that whole, where you spend, it's where you engage in kind of busy work and you never seem to make headway on those important goals. Procrastivity or something people are calling it, procrastination and activity combined. And we often the low priority tasks are physical and less cognitively taxing, right? So laundry on laundry, I'll quickly do a load of laundry when our income tax is, sitting there, needs to be done and it's overdue. It's a difficult multi-step project that seems kind of nebulous and scary. So you go, okay, I know I can do the washing right now. It's better than doing nothing and just sitting in front of the computer. And we often tackle the tasks that are usually on the to-do list. So it's kind of like that habitual, mindlessly slipping into our inbox. Like I know I do that, and I spend the first hour of the day when I tend to be more productive, faffing about with deleting marketing emails rather than like working on my resume or building a new website or whatever it might be. And I think this is because there's kind of clear delineations with time frame. We feel comfortable doing those things because there's a beginning, middle, and end of the task. It's kind of, okay, it's a physical task. I know how long it's going to take me roughly. I feel comfortable doing it.
I'm not going to have to make any decisions.
And I know I have to do it anyway. It has to get done at some point. So that's our kind of get out of jail free card. Well, I know I have to do the washing at some point, so I may as well do it now. And avoiding all of those things that actually kind of move you forward in areas where you want to. With bigger projects, we just can't understand what needs to be done and where to start. Again, it's the same with task initiation or procrastination. And what can we kind of do to improve this? I guess we need to change our behaviours of how we kind of set the scene for or taking action with the goals that we want to achieve and the things that will move our life forward. So first of all, we need to decide on what projects will move us in the direction, of our values, and limit the number we work on at one time to 3. You just want 3 things. You can't have dozens. You might have dozens and dozens of wonderful ideas for projects that you might want to do, or you definitely want to do. Write those down. There's nothing wrong with writing down a big master project list with everything in your current notebook. Just write them down.
Get it out of your brain. Yeah.
Get it out of your brain and on there, because otherwise you will be tossing those around in your mind for weeks. And add to the list, every time you come up with it, because a lot of people, when they go into that default mode network, all these amazing ideas pop up. And they feel like if they don't start them or they don't do some action towards them, they'll lose it. Writing it down is enough.
Yeah.
Write down in as much detail as you need so you can come back to it. That's all you need to do. In a reliable system that you know where to find it.
Yeah, not the back of a receipt.
Not the back of an envelope, or a back of a receipt, or on a post-it note because you're too perfectionistic to write it in a notebook because your handwriting might not be very neat. Write it in a notebook. Doesn't matter if it's messy. I'm telling myself that does not matter if it's messy.
It doesn't. And I've seen your handwriting on Instagram and it's not messy.
Oh.
But even if it was, I feel like our generation, I know we're similar. You're
young. You're younger than me.
But I feel like my nibblings generation has lost. I could and still can recognise handwriting on an envelope, and have been fascinated by handwriting since I was a child. I handwrite letters. I love getting handwritten letters. And I remember you'd get birthday cards and Christmas cards and would know from the handwriting who it was from. And so I do clock handwriting. And so I noticed that yours is very neat. But even if it wasn't neat, or even if you get a word wrong and have to cross it out or anything like that, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. When you're on your deathbed, you're not going to be going, and in 2023, I spelt a word wrong on my to-do list, and that is my greatest regret.
I think you would regret more likely not writing down, however messy, those amazing ideas, that were going to change the world. But, if you're worried about your handwriting, practice like I do. I practice my handwriting often. I use it as a meditation, like a mindfulness exercise. If you're really that worried, if that's important to you, which it is important to me, I enjoy writing. It's kind of self-care for me. It's something I do that's relaxing. But writing it down just does get it out of your brain and onto the paper in a reliable system. That's the most important thing. But next, we kind of need to decide what 3 goals we can take action on kind of each and every day that we'll move forward. I encourage clients to prioritise actions that will improve their functioning. Firstly, like one goal that's going to improve the physical functioning in the home, one goal around self-care, or one action around self-care a day, and one action around connection. So every night before bed, write down one action related to a functioning goal, one action of self-care and one action of connection that you can do tomorrow, something that like small steps. Set the bar really low on progress, like we've talked before about tiny habits. The same with this. Decide what time you'll be able to do those actions tomorrow and set an alarm or externalize it and get a friend to text you like you've been doing. Set a timer when you actually come to it. Set a timer for each one. You can even estimate a time the night before. That'll take 10 minutes or whatever. This will take 20 minutes. According to your energy level. So you might wake up and feel amazing and be able to work for like 25 minutes on your functional goal of clearing the kitchen bench, and then you take 15 minutes to drink a cuppa in the sunshine or whatever and call a friend for a short chat. But if you're not feeling so crash hot, 10 minutes on the kitchen, take a midday nap of 90 minutes, whatever it is that's going to that you need for self-care, and cuddle your pet for half an hour. So you've done those, you've feel that you've connected with someone or something, you've done something for yourself, and you've made your space functional. Because I think often what we do, we all do it, we're all guilty of it. We work on one part of our lives so hard. We go so hard. We go, we've got to do this, and I'm going to spend 8 hours a day organising my space and blah, 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 and then everything else just falls apart. So if we can kind of consciously do those things of self-care and connection, even if it's sending a quick text to a family member or whatever, or just, I don't know, anything like that. Walk outside and say hello to a neighbour. It doesn't have to be anything wildly crazy. It just does bring joy to your life and gratitude. I think those things, prioritizing is really about understanding what will move you forward on the things that are important. That's what's hard. And I find it hard, but I try every single day to write 3 things down. And if I can tick those 3 things off in those areas, a self-care activity, a connection activity, and a function moving towards whatever it is for me, I know that that's been a successful day.
Yeah. So mental flexibility is another aspect of executive function, and I can see that coming into play with hoarding in the sense that we can be very rigid in our thinking, getting set on a course of action and struggling to change that, or struggling to do a range of tasks in one go. Probably the thing that did most to make me make a concerted effort to be more flexible in my approach to life was when we did the episode on perfectionism, and you described it as a form of rigidity. And I remember in that moment thinking, it's not that I think perfectionism is something to be proud of, but I don't think it's shameful to admit, but I hate the thought that I am rigid in my thinking, and yet I instantly knew I was, but I didn't like it in myself. And so I've been trying really hard ever since. It's funny how one sentence can really, and you did that, so thank you, Jan. So I've been
That's okay. My pleasure.
I've been trying really hard since that moment of that episode to spot when it happens and go, yeah, you're being rigid, chill out a bit. But if that's not enough for most people to just think, you're being rigid, I don't like that. Because if somebody isn't that appalled by the idea of being rigid like I was instantly repulsed that was one of my characteristics. How can we become more mentally flexible, particularly in relation to hoarding and acquiring?
Yeah, it's really hard for so many of us, particularly as we get older. Like we get set in our ways, don't we? Our ways of thinking and being and doing. We're just not we're not learning as much, if we don't put ourselves out there, we're not really learning as much. We could just keep going on as we always have. But being cognitively flexible includes the ability to see an issue or a situation from a different perspective, right? And think about something in a new way. It's also about taking opportunities, taking advantage of opportunities that pop up and being able to kind of be flexible enough to take that on and adjust and change if something unexpected happens, which is a really tough one. I think that's a really hard one for people. And it's also the ability to admit when you're wrong, when you've received new information, and find ways to succeed even when there's unexpected barriers or problems. And those are a couple of the things that I think can be difficult for people who hoard. That whole idea to admit that what you thought could go in the recycling can't go in the recycling, and the result is that you keep putting it, you can't take that information on, so you keep doing that, and you things like that.
Or you keep buying batteries even though your battery stash will keep you going through several apocalypses. Something in you says, no, I know keeping getting new batteries is the right thing to do, and shifting off that course is really hard.
And also, and what about when someone like me comes along and says, I used to work for a battery company, and I know that if the battery, if they're touching one another, then they drain. And people go, what? And I say, yeah, that's why you've got to put them standing up. No. I was like, yes. So all these things that I tell people, and they go, they can't, no, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It does happen. So just being able to kind of, absorb that information and take that on board, and then kind of grow or change or flexibly adapt is really hard. I mean, people who hoard are very creative in taking new perspectives in relation to the use for everyday objects, right? That comes really naturally. Yes. Very justifying keeping or acquiring things is second nature as well. So you're cognitively flexible, but in a kind of a really narrow way. So when you're flexible in a really inflexible way. So when you're in the shop, looking at the latest Who Daddy thingamajig, maybe stopping and thinking, well, is there another object that I already own that can do that job? Rather than thinking, oh, I need that brand new, fancy, shiny Who'sma thing. Using that time to problem solve in the store, that's a little bit of a cognitive exercise, just a bit of fun. I'll experiment and see what I can think of, what might come up. Oh, yes, I can use 5 different things that I've got at home to do that job. I guess when you begin coming up with creative ways to use things that you want to keep, maybe consider whether your usual thoughts help or hinder you. Admitting that you didn't use all, this is the whole admitting you were wrong when you received new information, right? So admitting that you didn't use all of those toilet rolls for craft is actually okay, because now you know that you won't use them ever. And that's okay to now say, I know now that that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And I can let those go. I think those are the things. That's adapting to new information. That's finding ways to sort of succeed when there's problems or unexpected barriers or whatever. So those are the things that you want to try and practice, because you already are cognitively flexible with your creative thoughts around how things can be used and what can be repurposed. It's just about pivoting that to something else.
I think with approach to de-hoarding as well, especially if there's a lot of like logistics. I know we've talked before about how I used to feel like I had to plan out exactly how I would work on a particular area. And then I would start working on that particular area and it wouldn't quite go to plan. So I would retreat and have to start my whole big plan again. And it would never be quite right. And so I'd have to stop. And it took a while for me to go, or you could go, okay, that's interesting. That bit worked and that bit didn't. So if I just shift slightly to the right, or if I just do this slightly differently and adapt and learn was a shift. And what's interesting is that as I've been doing that with de-hoarding in particular, I'm doing it more in my life as well, in the rest of my life. There is some changes going on at work and I keep feeling myself dig my heels in and then going, oh, that's that thing you do. Maybe recognize that, drop your shoulders a bit, take it in, and don't go, no, this is how we do it. And so it's applying across my life the better I get at it.
Exactly. And it's like that muscle, isn't it? It's just that muscle. The more you use it, the more it generalizes across all areas of your life. It really does, because it is this cognitive flexibility that, yeah, it's a function. It's a function that you need in all parts of your life. And that's excellent. That's amazing. Well done.
Normally, being a little extra can be a bit much, but when it comes to healthcare, it pays to be extra. And United Healthcare makes it easy with Health Protector Guard fixed indemnity insurance plans. Underwritten by Golden Rule Insurance Company, they supplement your primary plan, helping you manage out-of-pocket costs without the usual requirements and restrictions like deductibles and enrollment periods. So when it comes to covering your medical bills, you can feel good about being a little extra. Visit uh1.com to find the Health Protector Guard plan for you.
Hey everyone, I'm Craig Robinson, co-host of the Ways to Win podcast, alongside my good friend John Calipari. I've been on the go recently. Phoenix, Kansas City, Chicago. If you're like me and have a home but aren't always at home, you have an Airbnb. Hosting your home or a spare room is a very practical side hustle. If you live in a big game town, you can Airbnb your place for fans to stay in. Your home might be worth more than you think. Find out how much at airbnb.com/host.
So executive dysfunction can make it harder for people to organise their stuff. And obviously that's relevant to nearly everybody listening. I do have a note of caution about this particular bit, which is it's easy to say, I can't organise my stuff because of executive dysfunction, or I can't organise my stuff and that's why I'm messy. But I have come to realise that a good chunk of why I've struggled to organise my stuff is that I've been trying to organise a ridiculous amount of stuff. My ex-girlfriend used to say to me, like, where you are organised, you are super organised. It's just that that's 2% of your life and everything else is chaos. And she was right, even if I resisted hearing it at the time. It's that trying to organise a hoard is almost destined to fail. So how do we know if our struggle organising stuff is an executive function thing, or if it's just that it's virtually impossible to organise 8 tons of T-shirts?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is kind of super important. Like, this is another kind of flag. It's super important to remember that we need to give ourselves some slack, because organising is a complex process. And this makes it even more difficult by our poor space to stuff ratio. Like, when we just have too much stuff in the space, it just makes it exponentially more difficult. But think about what it takes to de-hoard. We need to categorise our belongings, and this starts with like attending to the task, and then we need to make decisions about keeping or letting it go in the multitude of ways that we, allow us to be true to our values, right? We want to avoid waste, and we then have to problem solve where items should go and how best to make them easier to access, and then adapt our plans and strategy. So it's when we find something that's in effect, it's a lot. It's a lot. And the more stuff you've got, the more complex the process is, and the more time it takes, if you worked out how much time it took you to process one object, if you wanted to work out some economics around it, time and money, it takes a long, long time. So I think that there's a serious lack of experience in making these decisions and using your executive function. And the thing that I find working with people over a number of, like if I've worked for someone over a number of years, over a number of months, the things that start to pop up for them are that I have to cut some corners. I have to make some decisions around, what my values are and how strict they are or how flexible they are, and how much this is impacting my functioning. And I'm now able to take those, cut those corners in order to achieve the result I want. And whether that's putting things that you would normally donate into the rubbish bin, whether it's, letting go of things much more easily to charity, whether it be really limiting the amount of stuff you bring in, which is always a good idea. People over time realise, the experience of doing this just opens your eyes to exactly how difficult this is. Once something is in your home, once you've brought it in through the door, you're attached to it before you bring it in, and then as soon as it's in your home, you are immediately, the endowment effect immediately makes you want to just keep that thing regardless. So it might not necessarily be executive function. It could just be volume. It could just be way too much stuff and decision fatigue and all those kinds of things. But it is a difficult thing to do. Organising and de-hoarding takes all of those, everything. And you can imagine if you're not, maybe if you're not so well, you suffer from depression, maybe you have other physical illnesses, disabilities, all those types of things, it's going to be even harder. So we need to cut ourselves some slack.
And especially if you've lived in happy denial for a long time, this is not a skill you've practiced for 10 years. You've not organised anything in your home because it's felt necessary to say to yourself, everything is fine. And so if I find organising or categorising or something like that difficult and my instinct is to avoid it, it does help to say to myself, this is hard, but the only way it stops being hard is if you keep doing it. then it will be less hard. And that I don't want to make mistakes. I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to do it wrong. But the only way I can get to a point where I make fewer mistakes or where it's easier is by practicing it.
Yeah. The only way out is through. Exactly. The only way out is through. And that's all I can say. And just talking with people that I work with and how much that shifts over time. Like just how 6 months ago I couldn't have done this. 6 months ago this wouldn't have happened. And it is all them. They do 100% of it. It is them and their wish and their motivation to change and their dogged determination and continuing to practice that gets them results. There's no magic bullet.
And if you're listening and you're where I was 5 years ago, where you're convinced that what you have is an organisation problem and not a volume problem, I need to tell you that you might need to reconsider that as your core truth. Because as Jan was saying, when you have so much stuff and so little space, it's unlikely to be an organisation problem solely. Yeah.
Yeah, unless you've got a massive mansion and a team of professional organisers who, come in weekly, and that's the only way it's purely an organisational problem, to be quite honest.
So we also need to talk about working memory. What is our working memory in charge of, first of all?
Okay, so our working memory is the ability to hold information in our mind and work or play with it. Right, so that's different to short-term memory. Short-term memory is holding information in the mind without manipulating it. So that's really important to make that distinction. So working memory enables you to, as I said, mentally play with the ideas and relate one idea to another. So make those sort of free associations and things. Reflect on the past or consider the future. So we're doing that in our working memory. Remembering multi-step instructions and executing them in logical order.
We're going to come on to that.
And remember a question you want to ask as you're listening to an ongoing conversation. So the ability to kind of hold that there while you listen and process that elsewhere. So, and making sense of anything that kind of unfolds over time, where we need to hold something in our mind that happened earlier and then relate it to what's happening now. So ways we can improve our working memory are things like doing mental maths or playing storytelling memory games, like when one person starts the story and the next person repeats what the other person said and then add to the story, that type of thing. And generally storytelling and getting feedback on how logical the story was to hear is good as well, because I do find with practice, the more you story tell, either in writing or verbally, it does really improve your working memory. So that's what working memory is. It's about that playing around with things in your mind. It's not for holding that information. So often what we do is we do try to hold that information in working memory where it really should move to short-term memory, but we want to have it there because we're scared that we're going to forget it.
Which is why lists are good.
Yes.
So I know that working memory helps us with planning, and so I can really see how that's another area of executive function that's related to hoarding. I think the logistics of de-hoarding are just as tricky as the emotional stuff at times, because that degree of logistics and planning is hard. So how can we improve our planning skills? Maybe regarding to a schedule for de-hoarding, or for like de-hoarding over time, or a logistics challenge like I need to organize this stuff but there's no space, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, see, that's the hardest. That's one of the hardest pieces for for people that I work with. And one of the things that really helps is another person's perspective. So having a secondary person come into that space, because you're so used to your space, you're so used to your stuff, that sometimes you don't even recognize that it could be it could be managed in a different way. It could be, stored in a different way, all those types of things. And, if you're on, say, for example, you're on the spectrum, you might just have a completely different, different way of seeing things. And just having someone else come into the space can really help with that. I think planning skills are often, do you know what? I really feel what I find most often is when people hoard, they don't have the space to kind of sit down at a table, a clear space to sit down at the table with a notebook and plan what they want to do. Everything on the fly, everything, there's nowhere to actually do that planning. And that, I feel, a lot of houses I go to, there is nowhere, there is no table to sit at, there's nowhere to do that planning. And I kind of feel that because it's a logistics exercise, you really do often need to do it visually, sit down and even draw the space and think about where things might go. But there's not the physical space to do the planning.
Yeah.
So start there. Start there with making a space so that, you can actually do that planning. And the logistics, think about having someone with fresh eyes come into the space, someone who's non-judgmental, of course, someone who cares, who's compassionate, but it can really make a big difference. And planning, again, you just have to practice you just have to practice. You just have to think about, well, what's the very next step? What can I do? What can I do now? What if this happens? What will I do then? All that kind of thing. But a lot of it is not having the space to plan in the first place, and also not having the space to then categorize, organize, sort. I don't know whether this was something that you felt, but I have quite a few clients who said this to me. They can't bear the idea of even moving things in order to create a space. Even if I say, no, we're not letting anything go, nothing will go, we're just moving it, that is hard. And if you can be flexible in that way, you actually move things so that you have space to physically do the job, it will become easier.
That's something I'm okay with, but that I have heard from other people. I'm also finding for myself that having, in terms of goals is a big word, but I'm finding that having, for me, really big long-term goals are too tenuous.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really get me where I want to be. So I'm finding that having a mixture of short-term, medium-term and long-term goals is doing it for me at the moment. Because, who knows what my brain wants next week. But
Exactly.
But so what I've been doing a lot of work in the kitchen, and if it's like I want to clear that space over there, that's my medium-term goal. And then I have to work out, okay, to clear that space, I need to make some space here. And so that's my short-term goal. I need to do this to do that. And that's working for me better than when the house is fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Friends,
Yeah, that's just too it's too long term.
It's too overthinky as well. Whereas if it's very much, okay, by the end of the week, I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to use my kitchen table, or I want to be able to use my bath, or whatever your situation is. That, for me, is what I'm considering my medium-term goal. And then my short-term goals are the bits I need to do to make that happen.
To make that happen. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think that is a really excellent point, having those short, medium, long-term goals, because you're right. It is, I want to say it's like Tetris, but it's not like Tetris. It's like that game where you've got the little cubes and there's one space free and you have to try and make the picture. That is what it is. I don't know what those damn things are called. If it was Tetris, if it had a single word, it'd be a brilliant analogy. So if anyone knows what those things are called, please tell me. But that is what it's all about. And it's being able to use your frontal, your prefrontal cortex, your executive function, to actually imagine and do that in your mind and plan how that could happen. That is where, practicing that and doing that again and again and again, you will just get better and better. Chances are you've never probably done it.
And with a bit of, I don't know precisely how that middle bit will work, but I'll work it out, sprinkled in as well.
Exactly.
So again, on working memory, I get very stressed when I have to do a series of tasks. If I go out knowing I've got to get petrol, I've got to buy lentils, I've got to post a letter, I've got to pick up a prescription, my anxiety gets overwhelming. I'm convinced I can't keep that series of things in my head. I think that is a working memory issue from what you said earlier, would you say?
Yeah, it is. This is what I think. I think you're using your working memory for something that should be in your short-term memory or written down on a list, right? So thinking that you can keep all of that in your head when you've got other stresses and things, chances are you will forget something, you'll fail, you won't be able to do all of those things at once. Because you're trying to decide on which is the most efficient way to do each task.
What order to do? Yeah.
What order to do them, right? So so write it down in a list and then take 5 minutes to plan your strategy of where you'll go. Because that 5 minutes, it could save a lot of time and a lot of, self-flagellation when you don't get the lentils or whatever it might be. It's okay. We can relax, even if it isn't the perfect shopping trip, and just have a cup of tea.
I really like lentils. I will survive if I go a week without them.
Survive if I go a week without them. I forgot, but I do really like. There's something about that. If you haven't got, and I know when I haven't got a lot of time, I'm much better at writing down the list and planning the journey because I haven't got the luxury of an hour, 2 hours. I know I need to get something done in a very short period of time. So I will write it down or I'll say it aloud. I'm going to go here, here, and here. And if someone else hears me and says, oh, but that street's blocked off because they're doing, that sort of stuff. If I say it aloud, but just writing down the list and then numbering them even is enough or something like that. But you do really, I do think that unless your mind is relatively empty at the time, you will probably forget something. Cut yourself some slack.
Yeah, when you're going from one room to another and you'll forget the thing you were going for, I quite often say that thing out loud on my way there. So, but it's hard to do that in the supermarket without attracting attention. Walking around going, lentils. But there is the doorway effect. Like when you go through doorways or when you open the fridge or whatever, it kind of wipes you. That's why I say it out loud.
Working
because
memory,
even if I can't remember what I was planning, I can almost remember myself saying it. It's like a different bit of my memory somehow. Yes. Yep. Like that thing where you're not listening in school and your teacher says, what did I just say? And you can say what she just said, even though you weren't listening. It's that bit of my memory rather than
Exactly. Yes.
So frequently losing things can be put down to certain executive functions as well. And it struck me that it's not so much that losing things is a problem with hoarding necessarily. I mean, it is, but that's often more clutter related than executive function related. It's more that within hoarding, the fear of losing or forgetting things can make us feel that we have to have everything visible or within reach, which by definition worsens our surroundings. I don't know if that's working memory or just general memory, but is there a way of reassuring ourselves that we won't lose or forget everything if we dare to put it away?
It's a very big question. And this is something that the research has not, this is something that was pointed out in the very first studies that, I need to have everything visible. I need to keep things within reach. I need to put the important things on top of the pile, but then more important things go on top of the pile, and then it's no longer top of mind or in line of sight.
And then the pile falls over, and
exactly, and then everything's all disorganized again anyway. And there's no one has really picked this apart. No one has really worked out what is exactly happening. And I think that the hardest thing about this is that when we hoard, there is no way for our brain to remember all the stuff that we've got. It's like wanting to put the internet in your brain. You have to externalize it somehow. You need to build a second brain kind of stuff so that you can access information. And it's the same with our possessions. If we've got hundreds of thousands of objects, just thinking that we can remember where everything is, unless you have a particularly strong visuospatial, some people do, right? So you'll know, people will discuss the lawyer who has piles of paper in their office and can go, you want that deposition? And they pull it out, right? Because they've got, but not all of us have that memory.
I tend to know the quarter of the room it's in.
Yes.
Somewhere over there.
Somewhere over there, exactly. I think that one of the ways if you really do have problems forgetting where things are, I mean, a lot of people just take the doors off stuff, have open cabinets. A lot of people have cupboards with nothing in them and everything is outside. I have a lot of, I've had lots of clients like that, where there's nothing in the drawers, nothing in the cabinets, because they need everything inside. And if that is the way, you need it, work with that. But with volume, you're always going to find it very difficult to find things. That's just the way it is.
I think things like see-through boxes can help.
Yes.
Labels.
Yes.
I'm one of those people with a label maker who labels everything because it's fun. I listened to a podcast about this very thing, but for people with ADHD. And they had a professional organizer on it. I will link to it in the show notes, she's a professional organizer who specializes in working with people with ADHD. And they were talking about this very phenomenon, which is big in ADHD. But the solutions she was proposing were great if you don't hoard, really, because one of them was have as little as possible in your line of sight. So that the important stuff is there and you can, whereas if you've got a lot in your line of sight, she talked about making a V with your arms and can you only see the important bits you need to remember? And obviously in a hoarded home, no. And so that degree of distraction, just visual distraction, inevitably makes it harder to not just put your hands on things, but to remember what's there. And so maybe as another reason to try and improve your surroundings, that could be a motivator. But I think on its own, it's a tactic that doesn't work for a lot of hoarders. But the other stuff she was saying was like what you were saying, no doors on your cupboards, putting things, labeling every box, even if you think you'll remember.
Yeah. And the other thing that I've done more recently is I have a list in my bullet journal which says, where did I put it? So things that I rarely, like, things that are seasonal, things that I don't, I write, my calligraphy pens and right where I put them because I don't use them very. So I just have this list, and if it's something that I fear that I might not remember where I've put it, I'll write it on that list. And so I know to go there. I mean, you could use a spreadsheet for goodness sake. I mean, genius.
I booked tickets for a comedy show last night, and when I added it to my Google Calendar, I put in the notes, ticket is in the Ticketmaster app, right?
Exactly.
And if it was, if they'd emailed tickets to me, I would have said tickets are in your email. Or if they were coming in the post, I would write down exactly where I put them.
Exactly. I think we just got to take that extra little step because now we're just bombarded with information, with possessions, with, so many different locations where things can be. It's overwhelming. So we need to use strategies that sort of, externalize that stuff because we can't keep it all in our brains. We just can't. Our brains are not capable.
And we also can't keep it all at the top of the pile. Doesn't work. Nope. I have decades of experience to tell you it doesn't work.
No, I agree.
Because I tried it.
You tried it, and it was unsuccessful.
And I continued to try it despite that. But yeah, it feels instinctual. I've got to pay that bill. I'll keep it there, but that it doesn't work.
No.
So are there any other examples of executive dysfunction issues that seem relevant to hoarders to you?
Look, I do. The one thing I do want to mention, I think it's important to mention, again, we've already discussed it a little bit, is that our state of mind impacts our executive function much more than we realise. So engaging in effective self-care, stress reduction activities is as important as practicing and challenging all of these executive function skills. And it's also important to believe in it, like in self, we need to have self-efficacy. We need to believe that we have the ability to improve it because we can. It's been shown that you can improve it, but we have to believe that that can happen. And most of us have been led to believe that we perform better on cognitive challenges and things when we're a little bit on edge, or under a little bit of pressure, right? But the truth is that even mild stress can impair someone's executive function. And dealing with our possessions is really hard. It seems just so overwhelming, even just thinking about dealing with it. And that's enough to impair, to have your prefrontal cortex go offline. It's just enough, that little bit of thinking I'm not sure, thinking I don't know, thinking I can't. So coming back to curiosity and experimentation as a way to approach the de-hoarding project in our lives is really important, I think. And again, if we can come from that place of self-compassion, we're more likely to be able to successfully plan and organise all areas of our life. And the less we have, the easier it is. Yeah, the 10 tons of T-shirts is surplus to requirements.
It is. Almost certainly like 9.8 of those tons can go.
9.8 of those tons can go. Exactly.
I don't know what T-shirts weigh. I don't know how many T-shirts 0.2 of a ton is.
No, I meant that, but it's a lot.
That's brilliant. That's so useful and actionable as well. It's just good to know that you don't have to go, oh, this is a thing I can't do, full stop.
Exactly.
You can go, this is a thing I find really hard. Oh, but there are things I can do to make it a bit less hard.
A bit less hard. I mean, we may not be able to make it easy, but we can make it a bit less hard. And we can also, just purely by doing, repeating and doing can help.
So, Jan, if people want to find you online, where can they do so?
They can find me on Instagram, and are we still calling it Twitter? We're calling it X.
We're calling it Twitter.
Twitter. So Instagram and Twitter at stuff_ology, on Facebook at Stuffology Consulting, and you can shoot me an email, jan@stuffology.com.au. Sign up for my newsletter on the website stuffology.com.au. That comes out every Sunday for a few gems, totally for free. And yeah, I look forward to hearing from you. I love getting emails from people. So don't hesitate. Reach out.
Reach out.
Reach out.
Thank you, Jan. Much appreciated.
May we take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we record and listen to this podcast today. I am speaking on the lands of the Boon Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I acknowledge their connection to country, both land and sea, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today.
Let's talk secrets. I keep my hoarding secret, and I often wonder about the effect that these secrets and this shame have on us and on mental health. To start breaking the taboo, I want to hear your hoarding secrets to discuss anonymously on the podcast. I've created a form to submit your secrets anonymously. I won't know who sends what. If you want to tell me your secret for a potential future episode, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/secret. Shout out this week to the Very Well Mind podcast, which I will link to in the show notes. This week's top tip comes from Amy from the Very Well Mind podcast. Have a listen.
A really simple way to express gratitude could involve sending a message of gratitude out every single day. Like you could text a friend and tell them that you were just thinking about something they did in the past that was really kind and how grateful you are to have them in your life. Or text a family member just to say you appreciate them. You don't necessarily have to know people personally to thank them, though. Send a social media message to someone you appreciate, like a celebrity or a musician whose work has touched you. Thank them for the work that they do. Challenge yourself to thank one person every day for a month. See what happens to your life. You might find that you feel better and enjoy better connections with other people.
I think that's really nice, sound advice. Have a go. See if it improves your mood. See, it will definitely improve those other people's moods. Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to the Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with That Hoarder podcast. You can find more online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. You can find me on Twitter at That Hoarder and on Facebook at Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with That Hoarder. To find out more about how you can support the podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support and do subscribe to the podcast to make sure you don't miss any future episodes. There may be links in this podcast that earn me money. This doesn't come at any extra cost to you if you ever make a purchase through the links, and it helps to support the future of the podcast.
Hey everyone, Craig Robinson here. I want you to check out the Ways to Win podcast, brought to you by Ford and the new 2024 Ford F-150 truck. On Ways to Win, Coach Cal and I will discuss leadership lessons we've learned. We know all about the days spent perfecting your craft outside of the limelight and have knowledge to share about how strength, inspiration, encouragement, and adaptability are the key ingredients to drive toward your dreams. And those same ingredients can be found in the new 2024 Ford F-150 truck. So check out my podcast, Ways to Win, and also check out the new 2024 Ford F-150 truck. Learn more at Ford.com. Built Ford tough, built Ford proud.
When you make decisions for your company, you look for the no-brainers. If you have a lot of mailing to do, Stamps.com is the ultimate no-brainer. Use the Stamps.com mobile app to mail everything you need to keep your business running with up to 89% off USPS and UPS. Make the same no-brainer decision as over 1 million other businesses with Stamps.com. Use code PROGRAM for a special offer. That's Stamps.com, code PROGRAM.